So on Tuesday, we wrapped up the most expensive primary in American history. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton defeated sitting U.S. Senator John Cornyn. Cornyn actually is the sixth most senior Republican in the Senate. So this was an upset. If you take it back to the beginning of this race, tons of money came in behind Cornyn, but he lost. Maybe in part because Trump came in with a late endorsement of Ken Paxton. And now we've got a race shaping up between James Talarico, a state legislator in Texas, who's the Democrat, versus Ken Paxton. And what I'm going to do in this video is try to give you an objective analysis of the dynamics of this race. So what are the different arguments that each side is going to make? What are the sort of advantages and potential risks and vulnerabilities of each of these candidates? And by way of disclaimer, I worked on Obama's first presidential campaign. I then started a group called Arena, which became the largest campaign school for Democratic staffers in the entire country. And I also ran the communications director track there, where I trained over 100 campaign communications directors over the years. And so I come at this as a Democrat in terms of my political background. But in this video, my goal is to be as objective as possible, to just say, hey, like, what's actually going on in this race, and take my partisan hat off. So as a starting point, one thing we teach in our communications track is whoever frames the question in the race wins. And what we mean by this is, historically, for example, take Hillary Clinton versus Barack Obama in the primary in 2007, 2008, my first campaign. Hillary wanted the question the electorate would ask. She wanted the question to be, who's the most experienced? And if that was the question the electorate asked, then she would win because she had the most experience. Whereas Obama wanted the electorate to ask a different question, which was, who would bring the most change? And obviously he won, and he won in large part because that was the question that he got the electorate to ask. You could see this dynamic play out again in the general election. McCain, more experienced; Obama, more green, but also against the Iraq War, was going to bring that change, right? Similar dynamic with Trump versus Hillary. She was, quote unquote, the more establishment person, more experienced. Trump was going to be the person who was going to bring change, right? So whoever frames the question wins the election. So Republicans, they want the question to be, and we'll see this in vivid detail in a second, is Talarico weird, right? That's what they want. They want him to be weird. They want him to be out of touch, super liberal, right? Is Talarico weird? If that's the question that the electorate is asking, it seems like Republicans are confident that they will carry this state that they absolutely need to keep control of the Senate. Now, what question does Talarico want the electorate to ask? This one's a little murkier at the moment, but there's a couple of different questions I'm seeing in some of his messaging. One is, who's just going to make life more affordable? That's one. Who's going to be the least corrupt? Right? Is Ken Paxton corrupt, or who's going to be the least corrupt? That's kind of the second. And there's this bus tour that they just announced around the state, which is The People versus Ken Paxton, which seems to be a packaging of the corruption and the affordability argument, meaning they're going to try to make some kind of argument that prices are going up, the economy is getting worse, and Ken Paxton is corrupt at your expense. So in part, one of the reasons why your prices are going up is because of people like Ken Paxton are corrupt, right? It's a little bit more high concept of an argument at the moment. So, one sort of honest assessment I have for Talarico at the moment is he's got to simplify that message, and it's got to be repetitive. Because most voters in general at this point are low information voters. They need something repeated many, many, many times. It has to be really simple. And Talarico is weird is a lot simpler than what I just said in terms of the Paxton attack. So let's start with Paxton and what he is saying. He gave a speech the night of the election that previewed some arguments he was going to make against Talarico. But I think the most visceral and clear packaging and summary of those attacks is an ad that either just went up or they just released it on the internet that kind of pulls together a lot of the strains of attack that the Paxton campaign is leveling against Talarico. Let's take a look at that.
This is Texas. This is not.
There are many more than two biological sexes. In fact, there are 6.
This is Texas. This is not.
The American flag is such a complicated symbol for most of us.
This is Texas. This is not.
They're going to call me a radical leftist.
This is Texas. This is not.
Something that you love that's not family or friends.
I love, and just say this because it's on my mind, the trans children.
This is Texas. This is not.
Our southern border should be like our front porch. There should be a giant welcome mat out front.
This is Texas. This is not.
It is now existential that we try to reduce our meat consumption. I am proud to say that our campaign has officially become a non-meat campaign.
This is Texas. This is not.
So there's obviously a lot to unpack here. Let's start with one of the last claims there, which is this welcome mat comment that Talarico made about the border. And in a lot of these cases, I'm going to try to show the full video or enough of the video so you can understand what they're pulling from. And so in this case, let's look at the actual clip of what Talarico had to say about immigration.
I've always said that our southern border should be like our front porch. There should be a welcome mat and a lock on the door, meaning we can both welcome immigrants who want to come here and live the American dream, who want to contribute to our economy, who want to contribute to our communities, make us richer and stronger, as immigrants have always done throughout American history. And we can keep out people who mean to do us harm.
Okay, so the quote here is, this is what he said. He said, "I've always said that our southern border should be like our front porch." That's what they clipped. There should be a welcome mat and a lock on the door. We can both welcome immigrants and we can keep out people who mean to do us harm. So I think there's a little bit more nuance, if not significantly more nuance in what he said there. I think of all the sort of claims in this video and the things that Talarico said, I think if he, is able to get out there and explain and show the context of what he said there, I'm fairly confident that this will be the least damaging of the types of claims that he's made in that video that they're clipping together to make the sort of Talarico's weird and out of touch argument. Another sort of strain of argument that they're making here, the Republicans that I've seen all over the internet, so this is one that a lot of people are echoing, are the trans comments that Talarico made. Now, there's a few of these. One of them was that God is non-binary. I'll get to that in a second. The other was when he was asked in an interview a very personal question, and I think here's one where we might as well just watch the full video about who he admires and see if this in any way adds any clarity or context to what he was saying. Let's go to this clip.
Something that you love that's not family or friends.
I love, and just say this because it's on my mind, the trans children who showed up yesterday at the state capitol to advocate for their humanity. They shouldn't have to, but it was an inspiration to watch.
So it seems like in this clip, what was happening was he was, and mind you, a lot of these clips that they're pulling of Talarico is when his primary concern seemed to be legitimacy on the left. So it seems like he was going on a lot of left-leaning podcasts, and he was kind of speaking the language of the left, the progressive left at the time. And if you actually watch a lot of those videos and then you try to compare it to the Talarico you see today, it's quite different, which is both a liability for Talarico, but maybe an opportunity for him to clean some things up. And we'll see how he's trying to navigate that. So it seems like in this clip, there was some debate going on at the Capitol about trans rights, and that some of the young trans people came to his office before that. And that's why it was fresh in his mind and why he mentioned them as advocating for their humanity, as he described it. I don't think this is the one that's going to give him much trouble compared to the non-binary comment. And actually, as evidence for that is that actually Talarico himself for the past few days has been doing a lot of cleanup on the God is non-binary comment. He went on CBS News, I think this was yesterday, to actually say that he regretted his past remarks that God is non-binary. Let's take a look at that clip.
You call it intentionally provocative. Do you regret describing it that way or talking about God that way?
There are some statements that I've made that I certainly regret. There are statements that I've made where I've missed the mark. I'll be the first to admit that. But Ken Paxton is intentionally clipping my cringy comments to distract from his career of corruption.
Now, this is interesting because I think what's happening here is I think a lot of Democrats look back at Kamala Harris's loss and the famous Charlemagne ad, where it was, in every football game you saw, there was this clip of Charlemagne the God talking about Harris's transposition with trans prisoners. And a lot of people think that was a very effective ad. And whether it was effective or not, I do not know. I know that Republicans thought it was effective because they ran it so many times. And I think a lot of the commentary after the election from Democrats was that a lot of people drew the lesson that, hey, Harris did not clarify at any point that her position changed on this issue and why it changed. And I sense that Talarico's camp is trying to learn from that and say, you know what, we're going to do some cleanup on this comment. And so he says he regretted that comment. And then he tried to pivot to his message. He says that Paxton is intentionally clipping my cringy comments to distract from his career of corruption. I think it's interesting that he calls his own comments cringy, but then obviously he's trying to talk about Paxton's corruption. A former Biden aide, Yemisi, and I apologize if I get this name wrong, Egbowole, tweeted, quote, "I think it's great that Talarico is calling some of his high net woke comments cringe. Honestly, more young people running for office are probably going to have to do this. Peak woke got weird. It's okay to say that." Yemisi is saying, hey, actually, this is good. This is progress. And I think by and large, this is the right playbook, right? Which is if you do legitimately think there was something you said that you no longer believe or that you don't want to stand behind anymore, just honestly naming it is great. And actually, if you could say what has changed, one of the things that I think Harris should have said in the last election was, hey, whatever sort of super lefty things that she said or did in California, the easy explanation there was hey, I was a senator from California. I was the attorney general. I was a San Francisco official. And that's where I swam. I swam in those waters. But like anybody else, the more exposure I got to different kinds of people, the more I started to empathize with them and change some of my positions, because we should all change. And what she should have said was, hey, once I became vice president, I became a representative not just of the people of California, but the people all across this country. And that broadened my view and allowed me to think differently about some issues. And I think that explanation would have gone a long way to give people just a sense of, what has changed and why, and perhaps giving you a better shot at mitigating the damage of any positions that you have that you think are a liability. Now, it's not me saying it's what's a liability or not. A lot of these candidates are admitting these are liabilities. And so the question is, how do you deal with them once they are? Now, the problem for Talarico on this non-binary God comment is that just a few months ago, this year, he went on Jake Tapper and defended the very comments that he is now trying to say he no longer stands behind. Let's look at this clip.
National Republican Senate Committee is already highlighting comments that you've made as a state representative. For example, they're highlighting this.
God is both masculine and feminine and everything in between. God is non-binary.
What is your response to them using that, and explain what you were talking about?
Well, I understand that comment is a little provocative. I said it on the House floor when the extremists in the Republican legislature were picking on school kids who were different. But I don't think it's controversial theologically. Most Christians would acknowledge that God is beyond gender. In fact, the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, said that in Christ there is neither male nor female. And so if someone's got a problem with that statement, they shouldn't take it up with me. They should take it up with the Apostle Paul.
So I think this is going to be tough because he's now saying that he's changed his mind. Those are cringy. But then why were you trying to explain them away not too long ago, right? So this is going to be some fertile terrain in the campaign. Now, whether Talarico believes God is non-binary, is that a material issue to voters? Certainly not material in the sense of their lived experience and whether it's going to make their lives better. But these campaigns are often about social signaling, and it's one of the reasons why I think the trans issue, if people do believe it was somehow an effective attack on Harris, was effective, was that it was a proxy for whether she was out of touch in general, right? And so this is where Talarico has got to be urgent, and why you see him even in these few critical days, he's out there trying to do some cleanup on these issues. Another thing I'm hearing a lot is this vegan claim, right? And whether Talarico is a vegan, his campaigns is vegan. Talarico was recently asked about this vegan claim, and here's what he had to say.
We have seen the beginnings of Republicans try to figure out how they can attack you in this race. One of those talking points they landed on was that you're a vegan. Can I just have your reaction to that? Because I have seen a non-zero number of photos of you eating barbecue down in Texas.
That's right. Yeah, our campaign basically runs on barbecue these days. Yeah. And if all they have is lying about me being a vegan, I feel pretty good about our chances in November. I think it also just shows the extent to which they will go to distract from this disastrous economy. I mean, with the way the price of beef is going up, we all may be forced to be vegans at some point. So I'm going to keep focusing on lowering costs. I'm going to keep focusing on putting working people first, taking on this corruption so that we can unrig this economy. I think that's what Texans want. They're kind of tired of these games in our politics, the mudslinging and the nicknames and the trolling and the owning. But none of this is going to lower our costs. None of this is going to increase our pay. None of this is going to cut our taxes. And so I think what we're doing in this campaign is bringing people together across all these divisions, standing up to the silliness in our politics, standing up to the corruption in our political system so that we can actually start delivering for Texans.
Now, what you'll notice here is that Talarico is being like, of course, I am not a vegan, which, as a side note, as somebody who believes in animal rights and climate change, like, it's kind of a bummer that this is attacked, but I get it. It's Texas, cattle, culture. I get it. I understand it. I understand why this is an attack, and I understand why he's trying to distance himself from it. So Talarico is saying he's not a vegan. He's laughing it off. He's saying this is a distraction. The claim is a little different than I think what you would get from Talarico's video. The claim originates from this video, which appears to be from the pandemic, of Talarico talking about his campaign. Let's go to this clip.
We have, I think, heard more and more issues of animal welfare. I think not just because it's the right thing to do and the moral thing to do, but also it's, as all of you know, necessary to fight climate change. It is now existential that we try to reduce our meat consumption and that we try to respect animals in all aspects of society. And so I am proud to say that our campaign has officially become a non-meat campaign. So we are only buying vegan products from our local vegan businesses. Some of you may know Big Nona's. They were little Nona's, and then they opened up brick and mortar, so another Big Nona's. But we just got our pizza from there today. And so the point is that I think all of us, not just policymakers, but everyone has to take personal responsibility in this effort.
And so there's a couple things that are probably juicy for Republicans on this. He's wearing a mask, and obviously it was probably the pandemic, but it just makes him look kind of liberal. Now that we look back, I know I wore masks during a lot of the pandemic. I know a lot of people did, no matter where you were on a lot of the sort of lockdown debate. But the combination of the mask, the empty restaurant or whatever he's in, and the fact that he's talking about moving his campaign to vegan and talking about climate change is like a juicy clip for Republicans, right? And Talarico saying he's not a vegan doesn't quite explain that away, which is that he had his campaign be vegan. And again, do I think this is like a material issue to voters? No, but it's like stacked. They're trying to stack these things to say, this guy is just weird and out of touch. And this is why Talarico is out there trying to explain these things away. And again, like, he can't spend too much time explaining these things away because, if you're explaining, you're losing. And so he's got to dispatch with these explanations quickly and then go on the attack. And I'll get in a second to what some of his attacks are. Trump has jumped into the fray. He's echoed a lot of the same critiques that I just talked about and attacks. He recycled an insult that he used for Mayor Pete, calling Talarico Alfred E. Newman, like the Mad magazine guy. It's kind of a dated reference. And I think this gets to the critical difference between somebody like Talarico and Graham Plattner, who is the Democratic, for all practical purposes, nominee candidate in Maine. So Plattner is positioning himself, and there's a huge debate about how true this is, but Plattner's positioning himself as a blue collar kind of guy. He's a little rough around the edges. He's dealing with a lot of Reddit posts and, tattoo and things, emanating from his experience in the military and the aftermath, where he said a lot of controversial things. And this is like a critical difference between these two candidates. So Plattner is kind of a back of the class kind of guy, and Talarico is a front of the class kind of guy, meaning that Plattner's liabilities and strengths are from him being somebody who's, if you're Republicans, you'll say he's unhinged. If you're Plattner, you'll say, and his camp, they'll say that he's relatable and authentic. And his strengths and weaknesses emanate from that back of the class energy. The Talarico campaign and Talarico himself are very front of the class. So he's polished, he's earnest, right? He's involved in his church. He's quoting scripture. And so they're going to try to paint Talarico as out of touch and weird, whereas he's going to try to lean on his polish and earnestness in the way that, for instance, Mayor Pete has done quite effectively. So very different campaigns, very different strengths, very different vulnerabilities. The attacks will be very different. The defenses will be very different. Now let's talk about what Talarico is saying about Ken Paxton. And on election night, Talarico was ready with a video hitting Ken Paxton. Let's go to that video.
Something just happened in Texas. The most corrupt politician in America just became the Republican nominee for the United States Senate. 3 years ago, Ken Paxton was impeached by his own party for using his public office to enrich himself and his donors at the expense of the people. That kind of corruption is the rot at the core of this broken system. It's why we can't afford anything. It's why we can't get ahead no matter how hard we work. For 50 years, mega donors and their puppet politicians like Ken Paxton have stolen from us with their bribes, their bailouts, and their billionaire tax breaks. Ken Paxton has gotten away with it. They've all gotten away with it. But that ends this year, in this state, in this race. If we, the people, can come together to defeat the most corrupt politician in America, we can defeat this entire corrupt system. We can start unrigging this economy. We can start raising our pay, cutting our taxes, lowering our costs. We can finally get ahead. It's time to come together. The people versus Ken Paxton.
So there's a lot going on here. The Talarico headquarters also put out a tweet with Ken Paxton's mugshot. They pointed out that he was indicted on 3 felony accounts for investment fraud, that he was reported to the FBI by his own staff for bribery, that he was impeached by his own party for corruption, and that now that he is the Republican nominee for Texas, it's time to stop him. Talarico also said about Paxton that he follows the Ken commandments, not the 10 commandments. And this is a reference, I think, to a lot of things, but one of them is also some accusations of adultery, serial adultery from Ken Paxton.
It is about how you treat other people. Matthew 25, people who haven't read their Bible in a while.
You're not thinking of Ken Paxton. He's Attorney General.
Yeah, well, he follows the 10 commandments rather than the 10 commandments. But Matthew 25 tells us exactly how we're going to be judged and how we're going to be saved. By feeding the hungry, by healing the sick, by welcoming the stranger, which is more timely now than it's ever been before.
Now, to go through some of these claims, number one, in 2025, there were securities fraud indictments of Ken Paxton. So shortly after taking office as Attorney General, he was indicted by Collin County grand jury in the summer of 2015 on felony state securities fraud charges. So the charges stem from activities that occurred before he became Attorney General. While he was serving as a state legislator, he was accused of encouraging colleagues and friends to invest in a McKinsey-based tech company called Servergy without disclosing that he was being compensated with a commission in the form of stock to recruit those investors. The case was delayed for years due to legal maneuvering regarding venue changes and prosecutor pay. And in 2025, the charges were ultimately dismissed after Paxton agreed to a pre-trial intervention deal. As part of the agreement, he had to pay restitution to the victims, complete ethics training, and perform community service, but he avoided a trial and did not have to admit guilt. The second sort of category here is a 2020 whistleblower allegation. So in October 2020, 8 of Paxton's top aides and deputies, all conservative lawyers he hired, took the step of reporting him to the FBI. The whistleblowers accused Paxton of bribery, abuse of office, improper influence. Specifically, they alleged that Paxton was misusing the power of the AG's office to intervene in legal matters and launch investigations to benefit Nate Paul, who's a wealthy Austin real estate developer and political donor. They also alleged that Paul helped fund a remodel of Paxton's home and hired a woman with whom Paxton was allegedly having an extramarital affair. So this is where the marital impropriety kind of overlaps with the corruption allegations. So aides who reported Paxton were subsequently fired and pressured to resign. 4 of them sued under the Texas Whistleblower Act. And in 2023, Paxton agreed to settle the lawsuit for $3.3 million and issue an apology, though the state legislature initially resisted funding the settlement. The FBI and Department of Justice took up the investigation, but after years of inquiry, the DOJ quietly declined to pursue federal charges against Paxton. And that is that. Then the third category of stuff going on here, which is related in many ways, is a 2023 impeachment. So the whistleblower allegations against Paxton, his request that the state pay the $3.3 million settlement, triggered an investigation by the Republican-led Texas House of Representatives. In May 2023, the Texas House voted overwhelmingly, 121 to 23, to impeach Paxton, making him only the 3rd sitting official in Texas history to be impeached. The House approved 20 articles of impeachment, largely centered on the allegation involving Nate Paul, bribery, obstruction of justice, misapplication of public resources, and abuse of the public trust. Paxton was temporarily suspended for office without pay. The Texas Senate convened as a court of impeachment in September 2023 to remove him from office. A 2/3 majority, which would be 21 votes, were required. The Senate ultimately acquitted Paxton on all 16 articles that were brought to trial. The vote largely fell along party lines, with most Republicans voted to clear him. Now, going on in the background of this were elections in which Paxton was targeting people who voted against him, and there was a wholesale removal of a bunch of different people due to that, and due to a sort of another debate going on about school choice in Texas, where there was a voucher bill going on. And so the combination of the Paxton recrimination campaign and the school choice debates that were going on in Texas led to a huge makeover of the Texas legislature. And there is a lot of bad blood about this. So when you're looking ahead, and thinking about, well, what are the vulnerabilities for Paxton? There are actually a lot of Republicans who have an axe to grind with Paxton because of all of those debates. There's also this huge school choice makeover that's happening in Texas, where there's vouchers, and even and especially in small towns in Texas, there's mixed opinions about the impact of this school choice. So I think that's going to be a sneaky issue here. One other sort of issue here is some of the cases that Ken Paxton handled as the Attorney General. And one of them is summed up in a tweet here by Jamie Bonkowitz on Twitter. Quote, Ken Paxton offered a man 1 day in jail for raping a little boy. Today, Texas Republicans made him the GOP nominee for U.S. Senate. The Republican Party protects people who rape kids. So let me explain what's going on here, because I think this tweet is, I think, missing some critical context here. So the first part of the tweet references a highly controversial plea deal negotiated by the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, in April 2026, involving a former Waco attorney named Adam Hoffman. The charge was that Hoffman was initially facing a first-degree felony charge for continuous sexual abuse of a young boy. Paxton's office took over the prosecution after a local DA recused himself due to a conflict of interest. The case went to trial in 2025, but ended in a hung jury because the jurors could not reach a unanimous verdict. To avoid forcing the young victim to testify at a second trial, this is their explanation from Paxton. Prosecutors from his office offered Hoffman a plea deal. The felony charges were dropped, and Hoffman pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanors: indecent assault and displaying harmful materials to a minor. The state's plea deal recommended a sentence of time served, which equated to the single day Hoffman spent in jail when he was first arrested, and did not require him to register as a sex offender. Ultimately, the judge rejected the 1-day recommendation and insisted on a 60-day jail sentence instead. But the leniency that was offered in that deal is very much up for debate there. So these are some of the liabilities and avenues of attack that these two campaigns are going to show. On the money side of things, Teddy Schleifer in the New York Times reported that if Cornyn had won, because of Cornyn standing in the state, the key GOP sort of national PACs that fund Senate races weren't going to earmark any money for that race. But now they may have to divert as much as $100 million to that race. Meanwhile, Talarico raised $27 million in the first quarter of this campaign season, which is a lot for a Senate campaign. And he raised $3 million apparently just over the past few days since the Tuesday election. Now, Jonathan Martin had some very helpful context here in the way of a tweet. He said the last Democrat to win a Senate race in Texas was Lloyd Bentsen in 1988. Texas, this is LBJ days, used to be a Democratic state, but it switched. Beto O'Rourke came close in 2018, losing by only 2.5 points, 215,000 votes. And I'll get to that in a second. The key question here will be independent voters, as well as Cornyn's 36% of the electorate. So the people who voted for Cornyn, what are they going to do? Now, there's this woman named Jennifer Bryant who has a Substack, and I'll read you a little bit from her Substack. She said, so we just talked about Beto O'Rourke in 2018. 2024 was very different. She said Ted Cruz was up for re-election in 2024, this time facing Congressman Colin Allred. This time he won by a more dominant 8.5%, so 2.5% O'Rourke lost by. Allred lost by 8.5% a few years later. Allred was not considered a spectacular campaigner, but the more pressing issue was that the national environment was different. 2018 featured a national backlash against Trump's first term, whereas 2024 featured Trump being re-elected and carrying Texas by nearly 14 points. Allred was doomed from the start. The rural vote for Republicans ballooned, but the urban vote for Democrats stayed stagnant. In practice, this meant that most of the major urban areas saw more voters, but Democrats' margins against the Republicans fell somewhat. See also the calculations of the two-party margin, largely joined from the New York Times results map. Besides that, she said later, the Democrats' total vote lead on border counties collapsed catastrophically. There have been other attempts to explain that, but caught most politically attuned people by complete surprise. Latino voters who are extremely influential in border counties supported Democrats much less strongly than they had up to that point, continuing a trend that had been ongoing since the Clinton campaign. So, and then when she goes on to summarize, well, what could tilt us one way or the other? Tiny gains in rural counties could make up some of the difference here. And if you were to isolate border counties, which I think of almost as their own category, what's the effect of tighter border controls? Now, are people more kind of like, are they now going to reward Republicans for tighter border control, or are they going to be just less worked up over that and vote more on economic issues? There's also been a national swing, major swing, sometimes 30, 40 points of Hispanic and Latino voters away from Republicans back to Democrats. Is that going to carry across Texas and including in those border counties? There's a question of cities, like will turnout spike again in cities or will it remain suppressed? But what she really says is this, what she calls the skeleton key is going to be the suburbs. Are there enough conceivable votes that could swing towards Talarico? She said that a net swing of even 5% better than O'Rourke could cover Beto O'Rourke's deficit and completely swing this election. So this is what we're looking at here. And on election night, Talarico extended an olive branch to John Cornyn and his supporters, said, I want to thank Senator Cornyn for his years of representing the state. Said some pretty nice things about Cornyn. So Talarico knows his assignment here. I'm going to run through just some interesting takes on Twitter. You can be the judge of which of these you find most compelling. White House aide Stephen Miller said Democrats made history in Texas by nominating their first transgender Senate candidate. Christopher Hooks tweeted, a year ago, James Talarico was a mildly notable state legislator, and now a cartel is going to spend $200 million to convince the nation he's gay. Democracy kicks ass. Jesse Hughes tweeted Ken Paxton had a private moral failings that he worked through and didn't let affect his job, continuing to fight on behalf of the people of Texas. James Talarico wants you to believe that the story of Jesus' birth justifies abortion. The choice has never been more clear. Eric Erickson tweeted Paxton cheated on his wife repeatedly, moved in with his mistress after the divorce, pleaded no contest to criminal charges related to corruption. This is Talarico-style heresy, but for Republicans. The Democratic Twitter account posted a picture of Talarico eating meat, saying, November, here we come. Senator Ted Cruz replied, what the hell is he eating? It's not barbecue because Talarico is passionately anti-meat. Is that a tofu log? Adam Mockler tweeted, James Talarico said God is non-binary in 2019, and that offended my Christian ears. Therefore, I will vote for a serial adulterer who steals from thy neighbor and who will most certainly abuse his power once in office. Adam Parkamenko tweeted, I'd rather have a senator who eats meatless breakfast tacos than a senator who eats Trump's ass. Ruben Rodriguez tweeted, Talarico talks like an AI version of Mayor Pete. I always like Pete way more than people on here, but this 2020 vintage is both worse and lands so awkwardly, invoking front porches in every day of the week and twice on Sunday as a retread of idioms that no longer have purchase. Rob Flaherty tweeted, I don't know that I think Talarico can win the thing, but basically everything that would create the conditions whereby he wins the thing are happening. My honest assessment is I think Flaherty is right, which is I think a lot of the conditions of a Democratic victory are in place in Texas. And the question is Talarico going to show himself to be a formidable campaigner? When I look at him, I don't see a Mayor Pete-like talent. I don't, when I see some of his explanations, I do somewhat agree with Ruben Rodriguez that there's an awkwardness to it. There's a flatness sometimes to it. I could see why the Republicans are trying to kind of call him out as like quote unquote weird, even though I don't think he's abnormally weird for a politician. I just think he's kind of billed as more authentic. He went on Rogan and all that. And, I've interviewed him before. I don't find him yet like abnormally like gifted as a politician in terms of his level of authenticity. And I don't view him as abnormally flawed either. I think he's probably above average. And this is early enough where he could go one direction or the other. He could fall apart and become worse and tangle himself up, or he can rise to the occasion and get significantly better and become more and more compelling over time. And it's up to him. And I think this race will largely be determined on that question. Like, does he get better or does he get worse or stay the same in this election? And I think if he is giving more authentic, compelling, concrete, surprising answers to questions that captures people's attention and sounds different, then I think he can win. If he's, kind of shelling out platitudes and playing a lot of defense, then he's going to lose this election. But one thing is for sure, I think of this like I think about my New York Knicks here. A couple months ago, or even a couple weeks ago, I did not think the Knicks had a chance to win the NBA championship. Now we're heading for the championship, and I think we've got a chance. It might not be 50-50, but it's not 90-10 either. And that's how I feel about Talarico here. He has a chance, and I'm very, very much that, the outcome here is in the hands of him and his campaign. So we'll obviously monitor this closely. If you haven't yet, subscribe to our channel. We're going to be putting up tons of content and analyzing the coming midterm and then presidential elections. And we'll also be doing a lot of content on learning, lifelong learning as well. And so you'll get a combination of those two. Have a great weekend.